You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. Today, we're going to be speaking with the president of Brothers Brother Foundation, Ozzy Samad, about the work that's going on there and about Ozzy's life that led him to this work. Ozzy, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Art. It's a pleasure being here.
So, Ozzy, let's jump right in and have some conversation about your work and your life. How did you get to Brothers Brother?
So, Art, it's a long story. My background is actually in the investment industry, but before coming to the US, I grew up in Pakistan. I came here to go to college when I was 17 years old, and then started working originally at Merrill Lynch, then PNC, which is a large regional bank, and then I started my own investment firm. And knock on wood, we had done really well until '08 was a little crazy. My partner, who was much older than me, actually shot himself.
Oh,
So it was, a difficult circumstance. We had done pretty okay, and I was trying to see, what I wanted to do. Naturally, the stock market wasn't, just given what we had gone through, it wasn't something that I had a particular ongoing interest in. And I happened to be on a board for primarily African American students to go to school, go to the type of schools that our kids had the fortunate opportunity to go to, some independent schools. And I started looking into possibly, I was on their board and started looking into expanding the organization. And there was, one aspect. And then coincidentally, I sat next to the board chair for Brothers Brother Foundation at a World Affairs Council event. And we just had this conversation, and he asked me if I wanted to grab lunch. And, we had a great conversation. I told him what was going on and my interest in the organization called FAME, which is Fund for the Advancement of Minorities Through Education. And, trying to help kids who maybe had a difficult time growing up and so on. So in any case, we were having this discussion, and one day I got a phone call from him, and he said to me, "Hey, Ozzy, I'm on this board of an organization called Brothers Brother Foundation. Have you heard of it?" And I said, "Yeah, vaguely." And he said, "Well, the president is going to retire at some point. He's the founder's son, and do you know anybody who'd like to learn and take over?" And I said, "Quite honestly, no, but if I think of somebody, I'll definitely let you know." And he said, "Well, it's been a long flight from Malawi, and I wanted to know if you might have an interest." So honestly, caught me completely by surprise, but made the hair stand up on my neck because I had grown up in a developing country, and having the opportunity after, what we had gone through relatively recently, having the opportunity to give back in this kind of a way was just absolutely unbelievable. So, from there on, we had discussions, which honestly went on for about 6 months. And it was the honor of a lifetime to get involved with Brothers Brother.
wow, that's a fascinating story. And I just got to say, first of all, I really love Pakistani food. It's really good. And I
Thank you.
know that's not what we're really here to talk about, but I just had to mention that.
Funnily enough, we went to an Indian restaurant over the weekend. So very similar food in this particular case. So that's funny.
Now, what we are here to talk about is the idea that you served on a board And what happened is you ended up meeting someone who hired you to or connected you to work in the organization now that you're the president of. And I think that's pretty remarkable. And I want to hold that up because sometimes people don't realize what you get from serving on a nonprofit board. And it can be some really fantastic connections that lead to some really good personal benefits as well.
Art, I got to be honest, you really hit the nail on the head when you said that because, you know, we used to live in the city, then we lived in suburbia. So our kids went to a school essentially in suburbia. And then, all of a sudden, you come across an organization, and, the famed scholars were friends of my children. And when the president of our school, so I was on the board of our kids' school, when he asked me, would you have an interest in being on the board of FAME? I honestly didn't even know what FAME was. And I said, what is FAME? And then he started talking about, the impact of FAME, what FAME was about, how it was about giving inner city kids, a chance to excel. And it was really an amazing institution. And the other part that it really opens your eyes to is the need in our own communities, in our own community, within the US. Our organization historically has been focused on helping abroad primarily. And, ever since we joined, we've made a concerted effort to actually do stuff domestically. And to the extent that we now have a mobile clinic program to work with underserved communities within the US, and we have four of them, and there's a fifth one being built. And we work with, organizations that might be large healthcare systems. It could be what's called an FQHC, which is a federally qualified health center, and free clinics. There's a free clinic in Florida that we work with, an FQHC in Kentucky. We gave a mobile clinic to that goes out in the rural communities. There are two of them in Pittsburgh. One is with the Eye and Ear Foundation, and that does vision and diabetes screening. And another one is with Allegheny Health Network that goes out to see the elderly. And they also did screenings for kids who couldn't afford it before they went to school, at the start of the school season. And if you can't get a health clean bill of health, you can't play sports. So, the needs in our own community are tremendous, and that's something that, we made a point, frankly, of bringing up to a board after we first joined, and one of my colleagues who joined concurrently with me, and the board was very supportive of, our working within our own communities, and that program has expanded tremendously between the mobile clinic program, our disaster response, with Hurricane Helene, Milton, the tornadoes, and so on. So yes, I agree with you that um, being on the board at FAME for me opened my eyes to the needs that lie within our own community.
Well, the other thing I wanted to mention has more to do with this health wagon idea, this health mobile health unit, because I talked to a woman the other day who is doing this in central Appalachia, and she's moving these wagons, these health wagons, she calls them, around to different parts of the community to help people who are without health care. And it's great to see that you're also doing this in an urban area because we don't often think that there are people who are going without any health care at all, given that there are hospitals and other things that you can just show up in. But we do need these kinds of services, and it's great to see that your organization has shifted some to take that on.
You're right, Art. I actually know who you're talking about in terms of the health wagon. We've had discussions with them also. But yes, you're right. I mean, we take a lot of stuff for granted, right? You and I can get into a car, go to the doctor, it's not an issue. But in the inner city, I mean, just imagine it's a cold winter day, it's snowing, and you have to take the morning off. So you're an hourly worker, you take the morning off because you have to go to the doctor. So you take bus A from point A to point B, hopefully catching bus B. And if there's any delay, then you're standing, getting wind blown and whatever else. And then by the time that bus comes around, and hopefully it does on time, and gets you to the doctor's office, and you're, if all goes well, you get there on time, but you've essentially spent a day or, 3/4 of a day or most of your wage earning day. And, oftentimes what ends up happening is people just don't go. I mean, that's one aspect of it. The other one, to be honest, that, I wasn't aware of until I came to realize the importance of it is a hearing mobile van. So, my mother is a physician and she has hearing issues. And for the longest time, we never realized what was going on. So, we thought, oh, she's just not paying attention or, whatever the case might be. And now we did a lot of research into this topic, and what we found is that, hearing impairment is a really big issue, and not only is a matter of being a social issue, it has all kinds of impacts on your health in general. When people can't hear, you turn the TV up too high, and suddenly your neighbors don't want to visit. Or if you cannot hear properly in a restaurant, you stop going to the restaurants because you can't hear people properly. So, there's a whole concurrent series of events that follows not being able to hear. So we are currently working on a hearing van, and that's going to go out to underserved communities again, the elderly, whoever it might be, and provide free hearing tests and hearing aids. So we work in collaboration with the Eye and Ear Foundation. And, there are a lot of people, well-meaning people, physicians who go out and give of their time and do this for free. So, that's something else that is very meaningful and I think is going to continue to expand in terms of what we're trying to do in different communities. Yes, so the organization was founded in 1958 by Dr. Robert Hinkson, and my predecessor, Luke, was his son who basically grew up in the organization. So, it was amazing, Dr. Hinkson, going back to 1958. I mean, here was, a physician who was well renowned, world renowned in his field, who wanted to go make a difference in the lives of others who were not so fortunate. So, that to me, there's a book about Brothers Brother called Operation Brothers Brother. It's a historical account of how the organization came about. It was written in 1968. So it was, I mean, before I joined, I read the book, and, it was really meaningful in terms of, why I wanted to join, and where I saw the organization's history and where we thought, it could go. So Luke, Dr. Hinkson's son, I mean, to his credit, he brought the organization along from, being a relatively small organization to getting donations from Mylan going back to, which is now Viatris, going back to 1972. Started getting more and more donations from different pharmaceutical companies, medical institutions, hospitals, clinics, you name it. And then, started to package some of those together, essentially in a container and ship them to, countries in need. And his father, went out, going back, as I said, to 1958, all over the world. And the way he started was doing vaccinations and inoculations. So, he went to Africa, I mean, Liberia comes to mind, um, and, the Middle East, South America, I mean, all over the place. And then Luke carried on that legacy and really expanded upon it. So, my background, as I mentioned, is from the business side. So essentially, where we took over, or where I took over from Luke, was trying to expand the organization and build sort of a structure that, when I first came in here, we'd have, a lot of containers going here and there and everywhere. And I was trying to figure out, okay, how do we do all this? So really, we put a structure around what it is that we do, and you know, essentially work through staff that is absolutely dedicated to the mission of the organization. And I can elaborate on, how we structured the organization in terms of what we do. It's relatively simple.
Tell me then a little bit, go into a little bit more detail then about how some of the programs began to operate.
Certainly. So we work in 4 different areas. and which is healthcare, infrastructure, disaster response, and education. And my running, not so funny joke is that spells out hide, as you may realize that you can run from BBF, but you can't hide. So I know it's silly, but it's something that stays with you. So the healthcare program is what I was, talking about. Historically, that's been our largest program, and we get pharmaceuticals from, all the big, primarily generic companies, and also from some branded organizations. And to give you an idea about dosage, we roughly get about 200 million doses a year. So of medicine, so that's a fair amount of meds. And then we collect medical supplies, equipment from, I mean, all over the place, primarily Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., Baltimore area, but we also get donations. Literally, they could be from anywhere. Donations. So when, for example, when hospitals, change their beds, or they will contact us and say, would you like, I mean, especially when we went from electric manual beds to electric beds, we think electric beds are ideal, right? You can make them all different angles and whatever else. But if you go to, say, the middle of Malawi, electricity might be scarce. So the last thing you need is something that, you cannot move. So a manual bed is ideal. So, something simple like that. Walkers, wheelchairs. And these are donations quite often that are given by individuals. So we get donations from hospitals, clinics, but individuals are a large part of what we get in terms of what we call gift and kind donations. So, so in addition to the pharmaceuticals I was telling you about, and in terms of value, pharma value may be somewhere in the range of 80 to 100 million a year. And, in terms of valuations, we price our pharma very conservatively. There are other organizations that may have double the value, for instance. So in any case, that's one aspect of it. Something else that we do is that there are trips that physicians take to different countries. And, they go over, and I'm sure you've seen on TV the cleft lip surgeries and so on. But there are other, physicians that go out. Some may do eye surgery, some may do, there's a group that we support that goes to Nigeria that does pediatric heart surgeries, for instance. So we provide them with things like medicines. Sometimes we provide them with grants. So it just depends, who we're working with. So these are different aspects of the medical program. And in addition to that, I was telling you about the mobile clinic program, which is also, part of the medical program. And we think that not only can that be domestic, but it can also be expanded globally. So, mobile clinics, for example, in Africa, you have issues getting to physicians. I mean, the few physicians, and, if you're in the rural areas, it's very difficult to get to the city and so on. Oftentimes, people will walk for miles and miles and miles, literally walk, not figuratively, but literally. So our thought is, and there are mobile clinics in Africa, but our thought is to work with some of our partners to expand that program. And everything that we do is partner driven. So the way we work is what we call work through implementation partners. So, I was explaining to you the what we call the gift and kind aspect, but we also support programs. But everything is driven by the partners and in-country needs. So we never say, hey, we have this, where can we send it? It's more of what is it that you need, and let us know, and we will try to get it. And naturally, we're donated things, so we can't always get everything that we would like to get. But that's the way, it works. So that's primarily the healthcare program. We're even working on programs right now. I'll give you another example. USAID, which is U.S. Agency for International Development, has different global programs. And, one of them, we're working on an idea in Tanzania to do ads so people will not chew. It's commonly used in India. There's this kind of a chew that gives essentially a lot of people end up with throat cancer. So, we have colleagues and physicians that work in various hospitals, and we're working on a program to do an advertisement, for instance. There's another program called Nurses on Bikes. That's in Malawi, that'll go out for expectant mothers. So we're working on a USAID grant for them, and we've also given them our own grants. So, there are various programs. So it's a combination of um, what we call gifts in kind, which might be the meds and the medical supplies and so on, but also trying to help local programs with financial support. So it's a combination of the two.
I was just going to ask you about the domestic work you're doing, but on top of that, what's so interesting to me is how you saw a need to shift. And I would love for you to talk about that a little bit more. I know you mentioned some of it, but sometimes organizations feel like when they make that shift, it kind of uh, doesn't necessarily work within their mission. And I know you started out by saying, your goal was to try to support people overseas, but you found this need to make that shift to also supporting people domestically and also to get involved in disaster relief, which, as we're seeing, there are more and more disasters. So, talk about how your organization was able to come to that shift. What was it like internally? Because I know that there are lots of organizations that could learn from that experience that you went through.
Yes, certainly. And honestly, the way the domestic focus, now, disaster response we've done for a long time, but again, primarily internationally. But the way the shift came about, I mean, I'll give you a simple example, to be honest. So where our offices are on the north side of Pittsburgh. So it's a little bit of a hike from, where I live, and my colleague who I mentioned joined very close to my joining where he lived. In his background, he's an electrical engineer from Carnegie Mellon, worked for Chrysler, ran his family's moving and storage business at a very big business for 30 years, and we coincidentally joined within 3 months of each other. So one of the things that I noticed driving back from here are the number of people that are, on street corners. And you never know what someone's circumstance has been in life, right? So right? I mean, you just don't know. It's easy to say, oh, that guy is just a drug addict, or that guy is such and such. But hey, if you grew up with, one parent and maybe you didn't even know the other parent and your other parent was a drug addict, then maybe you wouldn't be that much different. So, before one casts stones, you may want to think about stuff. So, in any case, but seeing people, on the streets on the north side of Pittsburgh, and I've seen, quite honestly, more people. I drove through Baltimore and I was just amazed as to how close to Johns Hopkins, how many people were on street corners. So, I started thinking, okay, we're helping everybody all over the world. And we see so much need in our own backyard. And what are we doing to address this need? So, and then fame was the other one really that, brought this to me even prior to BBF. Because you see kids and you see kids from single families and, and say, oh, where's the dad? No idea. Don't even know who the dad is. I mean, that may or may not be the case. I'm generalizing somewhat, but it well could be the case. So, I mean, you're in DC. DC, my son lives in DC. DC's got its own set of issues.
Sure does.
So
Yeah.
all our towns do. So the question was, and this is from me coming from a different country to the US, and it was a long time ago, but nonetheless, when you come to a new country, you adopt, my wife's from the United States, and you want to help in some way, shape, or form. So it really came about from that, to be honest, just observations driving out of here saying, who's helping these guys? So, but our goal was not to just shift in terms of what our focus was, it was to expand what our focus was. So we wanted to keep what we were doing internationally, but add the domestic component to it. So we did bring this to the board, and you're right, there were certain board members that, well, historically, this is what we've done, and blah, blah, blah. And, we had a robust discussion about it, but at the end of the day, we're fortunate that the board was broadly supportive of what it is that we're doing. And this, I guess that's 4 or 5 years ago now, maybe 6 years ago, that the board said, okay, we will support programs domestically. Now, the mobile clinic program, I'll be honest, was, people questioned that to a great degree because, liability, medical liability in the US is a whole different ballgame.
Whole different ball game, right?
So even that, the way we do that is we're not the ones that are actually going. We went out on a couple of mobile clinic trips initially when we formed the program. And then what we realized is the key to running a successful program is working with an organization, a health services organization that has the capacity and the physicians to actually run the program. So, instinctively, when we were analyzing different organizations we could collaborate with, what comes to mind is the organization, just from a humanistic perspective, with the least amount of resources. You could say, oh, let's give it to them because they don't have much anyway. But what ended up happening in our analysis, and this is like a tough love kind of thing, is that what you come to realize is you don't want that sitting behind someone's building. And that is the case with mobile clinics across, from anecdotally in any case, but from what I've heard, is the issue becomes who can run this.
Yeah.
And that's why our partnerships, and what we started realizing is that some of the partners with perhaps even deeper pockets than the other questions, well, why can't they do it themselves if that's the case? But the various reasons, without getting into all that, are key for us is partnering with organizations that can run the program on an ongoing basis. And we put it together for them. So in collaboration with them, so I shouldn't say for them, but in collaboration. And it's been an amazing eye opener across the board.
That's great. I want to ask you about one of the things you mentioned that obviously we think about at the Wise Giving Alliance, and that is the valuations of some of the pharmaceuticals. As you know, um, your organization has been one that has promoted reasonable valuations, while there have been others that we've tried to convince to restate those valuations to make them uh, less less valued on their financial statements, I'll say. And I've always admired brothers stance on that. Tell me why you feel it's so important to get those valuations right. I mean, I can give you my answer, but I would love your answer because you're an organization and there may be some incentive for you to actually value them higher, but you don't do that. Why is that?
Um, I'll give you a straight answer, Art. From my perspective, and honestly, before joining BBF, I had no idea about pharma valuations, zero. It wasn't an industry I was familiar with other than trading securities. And then I came to hear about, valuations and so on. What our perspective is that we want to use what we consider to be a conservative valuation because we've actually done a fair amount of research on this topic. Excuse me. Subsequent to our coming, recently we did extensive research on this topic. We're fortunate that someone at who works for us came from the pharma industry, and so it was interesting, for us to do this research. And we had various board members who were previously involved with the pharma industry. So, and I had heard, and this was from my predecessor, who was very conservative in terms of valuations. And what we've come to realize that, there's a lot involved in valuing in pharma values. So you have what I would equate to as the list price on a car. But, the few cars that you buy at list prices, most people don't. So our goal is to account in broad terms for all the discounting and whatever else that goes on within the pharma industry and basically, be at a level that we think, okay, this is a reasonable level. That even if we don't see what the discounting is, anecdotally we see what the discounting is. Periodically, we've purchased meds through medical systems. Ukraine is an example, for instance. And then we see what those meds were purchased at relative to what I would call the list price. So essentially, and funny, you asked this question, we're actually going to take what's a broadly used number and discount it by 50%. We were using a different valuation method which didn't have broad enough pricing, so we had to use multiple methods. But essentially, we're going to be at the same valuation, except we're taking a broadly used number and discounting it by 50%, and we're comfortable with that valuation. I know this has been, a touchy subject in the industry, and I don't want to say anything about anybody else, but that's our approach to it, and I'd be happy to talk to you,
No, no, I'm glad you're comfortable talking about it because, well, one of the reasons it comes up so often is charities are very interested in making sure that they have high program percentages, that the money that they're spending is actually going towards programs. And so if you can get a higher valuation of those assets that you're distributing, it'll appear, at least on your financial statements, that a higher percentage is going to program. And, this is something, ironically, that I've been in the news about because, on the one hand, it's a shame that organizations feel like they need to do that. And secondly, for donors, if you're only focusing on how much money a charity is spending on programs, you're missing a whole lot. And the reality is that an organization can spend lots of money on programs and not be accomplishing anything. And what we really need to begin focusing on more is, what are we accomplishing? Well, this thirst to show high program percentages has actually driven some organizations to do this misvaluation, this higher than should be stated valuations to demonstrate on their financial statements. And it's really refreshing to actually talk to you, who is, in an organization that could be in the same boat as those others, but you choose not to be. And I think that's worth holding up, and I think it's worth applauding because, frankly, we don't want to mislead people about the financial situation of these organizations. And we also want donors to appreciate, though, that there's way more to pay attention to than how much money an organization is spending on programs. So I just thought I would make that point for you, and just also applaud your organization and its stance.
No, thank you so much for saying that, Art. That's very kind of you. I've noticed a few things, especially, given my particular background, and not all of them are transferable as such, but here's one of my observations. And, people may not like this analogy, but on Wall Street, people get paid tons of money, right? Where does most of the money go? Not most, but where does a lot of the money go that these firms generate? It goes to pay people, what at times can be considered crazy amounts of money. But what are you actually paying conceptually? You're paying for human talent,
Yeah.
right? So what do we do in nonprofits? And I know Dan, I think his name is Dan Pallotta,
Yeah.
has commented on this. But what do we do? What we do in nonprofits is the expectation, whether it's institutional, individual, or whatever, is that pay people the least amount of money, and you hope that you get people who are altruistic, which you always want naturally, otherwise, why are you in the nonprofit? But still, there should, in my opinion, there should be some level of balance there. And I'll give you an example. I was talking about restructuring this organization. In our heyday, we had 37 people, and we now have 15. And our output quantifiably is more than when we had 37. And we've cut our payroll down by 60 to 70%, but everyone's getting paid more. So it depends on, conceptually what it is you believe and what it is that you're looking for. And I'm personally happy to have this discussion with foundations and anybody else. And I do, once you have to obviously get close enough to somebody to be able to, speak openly. But these are my observations about, the nonprofit and for-profit industry. If you take disaster response, we clearly state that 100% of donations go towards whatever disaster. That's a different circumstance in our book. And the reason is that, every mom and pop person or household or whoever it might be wants to help the neighbor. They want to know that dollar is going to the neighbor. Their neighbor, whoever is impacted, if you look at Helene and Milton. So, that to us is a different circumstance. We want you to know that your donation is going towards whoever. But the truth of the matter is that something that we take on over and above our normal work. So we're not asking for compensation in any way, shape, or form, but it does. It just increases the workload on
Yes.
everybody involved.
Yes.
But, the person in North Carolina doesn't have a house. So, but so that aspect, we're 100% there. But otherwise, I would say that I agree with you 100% in terms of, certain organizations trying to, you know, show how their balance sheets, income statements might look, or might want to make them look better and so on. I will right up front state that we as an organization want to pay our employees a fair wage, and the what you get out of it is what we promise you, that which is we will make sure that whatever you donate really is impactful, not superficially but for real.
Yeah.
So so that's, I just think this is a philosophical discussion that nonprofits have to have at a certain at a certain point with funders, and so on and so forth. But in terms of disasters and so on, for the average person, yes, I agree that they want their money to go to help whoever it might be, and that's what we've taken on from our perspective. That's what we will do and will continue to do.
Well, we can feel the landscape shifting a little bit on this question of how we treat our nonprofit employees. First of all, um, what used to be a way for the public to assess the quality of a nonprofit's work, that is, how are we keeping salaries down, is suddenly shifting and flipping to one of, are we paying people enough, and are people being essentially abused in these organizations and mistreated because we're not paying them enough, because we're not giving them the amount of time off that they should have, because we're overworking them, because they get depressed and many of them begin leaving the sector. And I was just in a conversation the other day with a group of organizations talking about how we need to begin to bend the cultures in some nonprofit organizations to take out this idea that you solve problems at all costs and you don't take care of yourself and you don't take care of your people inside of your organizations, because frankly, if you don't have good people, you're not going to be able to achieve any objectives. And I know why you all will say, we're going to give 100% of anything that comes in pass through to people who need help in case of disasters. But there's a reality there. Someone is paying that administrative cost. It's not you, maybe it's not the donor, but you're paying for it somehow internally, either through um, funding that someone else gives you to do that, or through the blood, sweat, and free services of your employees. And I think the public is that's starting to become an accountability issue. It's starting to become an ethical issue where years ago no one would ever even stop to think about it. So we're getting there on this, and I think we're going to hear a lot more about it. We're revising the standards for charity accountability. We're in the middle of a process to do that, and I know that this issue will be one that we take on squarely to see how we might build in these kinds of protections and support for people who are working in nonprofits, because donors actually care about it now.
No, I believe it. And Art, we have made a point of getting as best as we can in terms of the benefits and so on for our own employees. And I have stated explicitly to our board that if we're going to be helping somebody across in Africa, I'm sure the heck going to be helping somebody in this building who's helping the said person in Africa, or it could be in Florida, or it could be in North Carolina, or wherever it might be. So that's something that, we as an organization and from a management perspective, I make no excuses for. And I said, yes, I want our employees to have the best health care. I want them to have some sort of a retirement plan, and anything that we can do for them, we will do. And you get it back in spades. So
Absolutely. We've had about almost 20% increase in inflation in the last 4 or 5 years. And so if you're paying people what you were paying them 3 years ago, they're losing money just because of that. And if you add to that, what we know is happening is the erosion of the middle class, which many nonprofit organizations hopefully are able to pay their people into. You're finding that people in that middle class are having difficulties making ends meet. So, we have to do what we can for people and not have them have to do our jobs in our organization, then go drive Uber at night while they're trying to take care of their children and maybe get to their own medical appointments and have some time off to enjoy their lives. So we can't ask people to work in such a way that they're not able to care for themselves and take care of their families. So I'm I'm
Agreed.
I'm glad you're leading in that. I'm
No,
glad
thank you all.
you're leading in that. So
Yeah, and anytime you want to have a discussion offline, I'd love to come down to DC. As I mentioned, son is down there, so
yeah, well, let's make
happy
sure
to
we do
visit.
that. Well, look, we're probably just about out of time, but I want to thank you, Ozzy, for joining me on the show and for being so candid about your own experiences, what you're doing at Brother's Brother. And I just hope that you're able to continue this amazing work that you're doing and that it can grow and expand to meet the emerging needs abroad and here in the United States.
Thank you so much, Art. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we're very fortunate. You know, I say we couldn't do anything without our donors, and I always take my hat off to people who keep donating, disaster after disaster and all other times. We have a responsible, loyal individual donor base in addition to the foundation community and so on and so forth. So I couldn't thank them enough. And I always say, and I say this every time, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, we could not do our work without their support. So first of all, thank you for having me on. And secondly, thank you to everybody who allow us to do our work.
Well, great. Well, to all who are listening to this, this is a weekly show. The Heart of Giving podcast comes out with a new episode every Tuesday. So I hope you will subscribe to the show so that you can get all of those episodes as they're released. I also hope that you'll consider supporting the podcast. And you can do that by going to our website, give.org, which is the website for the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. You can make a donation there and it will be put to great use. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here next week.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.